My mom gave me a demand, so I used it to ruin her life. It all started when I was 9 and she brought home the first adopted baby, a premature Filipino baby who needed oxygen support every few hours. Mom filmed me holding him for her first campaign video, said it showed how the whole family was dedicated to saving lives. I didn't know it at the time, but that was the beginning of her GoFundMe career. And by the time I turned 17, I was raising 8 kids. I was exhausted in a way that made my bones ache. That's when she showed me photos on her phone at the kitchen counter. 3 siblings from Moldova, all under 2. One had developmental delays that would need constant therapy. Mom, I can't do this anymore, I told her. My voice was shaking because I knew what was coming. She tilted her head the way she always did when she was about to manipulate me. Are you saying you won't help these innocent children? I'm saying I'm 17 and drowning. That night she came to my room after everyone was asleep. Her voice was so quiet it scared me. Fine, don't help. She pulled up their medical files on her phone. But either you care for them or they suffer. Your choice. And imagine what happens to the donations when people find out these kids aren't getting proper care. The thing was, she knew exactly what she was doing. She knew I'd never let those babies suffer. She'd trained me since I was 9 to put them first. The next morning, I tried to test her. I just wanted to go to one AP history class. When I came home, I found 4-year-old Marky on the kitchen floor, his lips turning blue. Allergic reaction. Mom was on the couch updating her latest campaign post about the sacrifices a mother makes. Accidents happen when you're selfish, she said without looking up. Maybe I should mention in my next update how overwhelmed I am doing this alone. My hands shook as I jabbed the EpiPen into Marky's thigh. He gasped and started crying, and I held him while something inside me shifted. She'd let him almost die to prove a point. Then something in me broke that evening. I walked in on my mom with all the kids who could talk sitting in a circle. What do we tell people who donate to help us? She was asking in her sweet voice. 6-year-old Lily was crying. But you're mean to Farah, my name. Mom's face went cold. I'm the only one keeping this family together. The only one raising money to keep you fed. Now what do we say? The kids chorused in these tiny, scared voices. Thank you for helping Mommy save us. We love you very much. She made them practice it 5 more times. Each time louder. Each time more broken. Then she filmed them saying it for her next campaign update. That's when I decided. If she wanted me to give it my all, I would do exactly that. But not the way she expected. I stopped fighting her and dropped out of school completely. Not officially, just stopped going. And when I did show up, I brought the toddlers with me. Told my calculus teacher they were mine when she asked. Let everyone see. Let them all wonder why a 17-year-old had 3 toddlers in class during an exam. I started using her credit cards at the medical supply store. $600 in one transaction. When the pharmacy flagged the purchase, I told them my mom asked me to pick everything up. Let them note that a teenager was buying hundreds in prescriptions alone. 2 weeks later, she announced she was adopting premature twins with kidney issues. Already started a new campaign, she said at dinner, showing me her phone. $60,000 raised in 3 days. People love medical emergency stories. The twins would need dialysis support daily. The agency needs proof of a full-time caregiver. I told them you'd deferred college. The next morning, she left for a donor appreciation retreat in Crumlin, Ireland for 5 days. She left me with nothing but a note with the twins' feeding schedules. One twins monitor alarmed every hour when his levels dropped. Every single hour. Day 3, I was trying to manage the twins' dialysis schedule when Ava started choking on her breakfast. I had a twin under each arm trying to help her when she turned purple. That's when I called 911. The paramedics found me sobbing, covered in baby vomit, trying to manage 14 kids. When they asked where my parents were, I showed them Mom's text from Ireland. Handle it. I'm networking with major donors. They took us all to the hospital, including me, who was apparently suffering from stress-induced arthritis and mild dwarfism. And the next day, she said the words that changed everything. Did you know she's collecting $11,000 a month in adoption subsidies? On top of her GoFundMe campaigns? My knees buckled. We've been building this case for months, she said quietly. Everyone saw it. Your teachers, the paramedics, the pharmacy. We just couldn't prove it until now. I smiled. My mom would be home in 2 days, having no idea what she was coming back to. I sat in the hospital waiting room with my hands clamped between my knees to stop the shaking. Deborah Schroeder, the nurse who'd told me about the investigation, kept appearing with juice boxes every 20 minutes. She'd crouch down in front of me and press the small box into my palm. My blood sugar had crashed from the stress, and I couldn't make my fingers work right to puncture the straw through the foil circle. Deborah did it for me each time without saying anything. Down the hallway, Child Protective Services was interviewing each of my siblings in separate rooms. I could hear Lily crying through one of the doors. My whole body wanted to stand up and go to her, but Deborah's hand on my shoulder kept me in the plastic chair. The waiting room had these awful fluorescent lights that made everything look greenish and wrong. Other people sat scattered around the room, flipping through old magazines or staring at their phones, and I wondered if they knew what was happening down that hallway. If they knew that 14 kids were being taken away from the only home they'd ever known, even if that home was terrible. After 2 hours, the social worker came out and sat in the chair beside me. She had this gentle expression on her face that made my throat close up. She introduced herself as Jenny and explained that all 14 children were being placed in emergency protective custody tonight. I'd be going to a specialized foster home for older teens who'd experienced parentification and exploitation. The words didn't make sense at first. I just kept thinking about the twins and their dialysis schedule and whether the foster families would know how to manage the alarms. Jenny must have seen something in my face because she leaned closer. I asked if I could stay with the little ones because they'd be scared without me. My voice came out high and thin. Jenny shook her head and told me that part of my healing meant learning I wasn't responsible for them anymore. The younger children were going to trained foster families who could provide the care they actually needed. She said it so kindly, but it felt like being ripped in half. Deborah pulled my hands out from between my knees and held them up so I could see. My knuckles were swollen and red, the joints twisted in ways that didn't look right. She explained that my body had been screaming for help for probably years. The arthritis was from chronic stress. My growth had been stunted by malnutrition because I always fed the babies first and barely ate myself. I stared at my hands like they belonged to someone else. Deborah said I was 4 inches shorter than I should have been, and my bone density was that of someone much older. A man in a dark suit walked into the waiting room and introduced himself as Detective Nathaniel Harper. He was the lead investigator on my mother's case. He had kind eyes, but his voice was direct and serious. He sat across from me and explained they'd been watching our house for 6 weeks after my calculus teacher reported seeing me in class with 3 toddlers during finals. I'd thought no one was paying attention. I'd thought I was invisible. Harper pulled out a folder and showed me reports with dates and times. The pharmacy had flagged my purchases immediately and called CPS. The paramedics who'd responded to Marky's allergic reaction months ago had already filed a report about my mother's disturbing behavior. Every single person I desperately hoped would notice had actually been building a case the whole time. I started crying and couldn't stop. Harper handed me tissues and said that's exactly what my mother wanted me to believe, that I was alone, that no one cared. He explained that financial exploitation cases take time to build because they need to document the pattern and gather evidence of intent. They couldn't just take the kids based on one incident. They needed proof of systematic abuse. Jenny touched my arm and told me her full name was Jenny Trotter, and that I'd be staying with a foster mother named Alana Gallagher. Alana specialized in helping parentified teens transition to normal adolescence. She had a quiet house with just one other foster teen. My only job there would be to be 17 years old. I didn't know what that meant anymore, being 17. Jenny drove me to Alana's house that night in her Honda with the child safety locks. I wore the same clothes I'd been wearing when the paramedics came, still stained with baby vomit and formula. Everything at home was considered evidence now. Jenny said they'd bagged it all up and taken it to be photographed and cataloged. We drove through neighborhoods I'd never seen before, past houses with front porches and mailboxes shaped like animals. Alana met us at the door with this warm smile that made me want to run away. She was maybe 50 with gray streaks in her dark hair, and she wore jeans and a soft sweater. She told me immediately that I didn't have to take care of anyone here, not even myself if I didn't want to. She'd handle everything. Alana showed me through a house that smelled like vanilla and bread. There was only one other teenager there, a girl named Maya who waved from the couch and went back to her homework. Alana led me upstairs to a small bedroom at the end of the hall. It had an actual bed with a thick comforter, a desk with a lamp, and a window with real curtains that blocked out the streetlights. She said I could decorate it however I wanted. The door had a lock that only I controlled. I started crying again because I hadn't had privacy in 8 years, not since I was 9 and Mom brought home that first baby. Alana didn't try to hug me or tell me everything would be okay. She just stood there and let me cry until my legs gave out and I sat on the floor. Then she sat beside me and waited. That first night, Alana helped me into the bathroom and showed me where the towels were, and left me alone to shower for the first time in weeks. I stood under the hot water until it ran cold and my fingers went wrinkly, and I still didn't want to get out because nobody was banging on the door asking me to hurry up. When I finally came out wearing clean pajamas Alana had left on the counter, she was sitting in the hallway reading a book. She walked me to my room and showed me how the lock worked from the inside, and told me she'd be downstairs if I needed anything. I climbed into the bed with its thick blanket and soft pillows and closed my eyes and waited for sleep. It didn't come. The house was too quiet. I kept listening for the twins' monitor to start beeping, or for one of the toddlers to wake up crying, or for Marky to call out that he needed water. My body was so tired it hurt, but my brain wouldn't shut off. Every few minutes, I'd jerk awake thinking I'd missed an alarm or forgotten to give someone their medicine. Around midnight, I got up and checked the lock on my door 3 times to make sure it was really locked. Then I sat on the floor with my back against the bed and just listened to the silence. It felt wrong. Dangerous even. Like something bad was about to happen because I wasn't watching all the kids. At 3 in the morning, I heard footsteps in the hall and my whole body went tight with fear before I remembered where I was. Alana knocked softly and asked if she could come in. I unlocked the door and she sat down on the floor next to me without asking why I was sitting there instead of sleeping in the actual bed. She told me this was normal, that my body had been running on stress for so long it didn't know how to feel safe anymore. She said my brain was still in survival mode, still listening for danger, still thinking I needed to be ready to handle the next crisis. She explained it would take time for my body to understand that the babies were okay without me, that other adults were taking care of them now, that I could finally rest. We sat there together for maybe 20 minutes before she asked if I wanted some warm milk or tea. I said no, but then followed her downstairs anyway, because being alone in the quiet felt worse than being awake. She made herself chamomile tea and gave me a mug too, and we sat at her kitchen table not really talking. When the sun started coming up around 6, I finally felt tired enough to try sleeping again. I went back to my room, and this time I made it about 2 hours before the nightmares woke me up. When I came downstairs around 9, Alana was in the kitchen making pancakes and scrambled eggs and bacon. The smell made my stomach hurt because I couldn't remember the last time someone had cooked breakfast for me, instead of me making bottles and cutting up food for 14 kids. She told me to sit down and put a full plate in front of me with orange juice and asked if I wanted coffee. I started eating, and it was like my body suddenly remembered it was starving. I shoved the food in my mouth so fast I barely tasted it, the way I'd learned to eat over the years when I only had a few minutes before someone needed something. Alana sat down across from me with her own plate and watched me for a second before saying gently that there was plenty more food and nobody was going to take my plate away. I felt my face get hot with shame and forced myself to slow down, to actually chew, to put my fork down between bites. She told me about the other girl staying here, Maya, who was 17 too and at the school right now. She said Maya had her own stuff going on, and that I didn't need to worry about taking care of her or being friends if I didn't want to. My only job was to focus on myself. After breakfast, Jenny called and said she was coming by that afternoon with updates about my siblings. Those 3 hours waiting felt like forever. I tried to watch TV but couldn't focus. I kept thinking about the babies and whether they were scared in their new foster homes, and if the toddlers understood why I wasn't there anymore. Jenny showed up at 2 with a folder full of papers and photos. She sat with me and Alana at the kitchen table and went through each kid one by one. The babies were settling in okay with their foster families who had experience with medical needs. The toddlers were confused and asking for me, but they were safe and being fed and getting the attention they needed. The older kids like Lily were in special placements with therapists who understood what they'd been through. Jenny said they were all asking about me, and she'd told them I was safe, and that we'd all see each other again when everyone was more settled. She explained that right now separation was necessary for everyone's healing, that the kids needed to learn how to be kids without me parenting them, and I needed to learn how to be 17 without taking care of everyone. She showed me a picture someone had taken of Lily smiling at a park, and I started crying again because I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen her actually smile like that. Not the fake smile Mom made her do for videos, but a real one. Jenny told me the foster families were good people who'd been trained and checked, and that the kids were getting 3 meals a day and medical care and therapy and everything they needed. She said I'd done an amazing job keeping them alive under impossible conditions, but now it was time to let the adults handle it. That evening, Harper called my new phone that Jenny had given me. He said my mother's flight was landing at 9 tomorrow morning and police would be waiting at the airport to arrest her. He needed me to come to the station tomorrow afternoon to give a formal statement about everything that had happened. Jenny would be there with me the whole time. I felt sick thinking about sitting in a police station talking about my mom, but I said okay. Harper told me I was incredibly brave and that what I'd done by creating that paper trail had probably saved those kids' lives. After I hung up, I sat on my bed and thought about my mother on that plane right now, probably sleeping or watching a movie or looking at her phone, having no idea what was waiting for her. Part of me felt guilty. Most of me felt relieved. The next afternoon, Jenny picked me up and drove me to the police station downtown. Harper met us in the lobby and took us back to a small room with a table and chairs and a recording device. He explained that he needed me to tell him everything I could remember about the exploitation, the coaching sessions, the staged emergencies, all of it. He said to take my time and that we could stop whenever I needed to. So I started talking. I told him about being 9 years old and holding that first baby for the campaign video. About how the number of kids kept growing and growing until I was raising 8 and then 10 and then 14. About the coaching sessions where Mom made the kids practice their lines for donor videos. About finding Marky on the floor with his lips turning blue while Mom posted on social media. About her threatening me that night in my room, telling me the kids would suffer if I didn't help. About the twins and their dialysis schedule and the monitor that beeped every single hour. About Ava choking while I had babies under both arms and how I finally called for help. Harper recorded everything and took notes and kept saying thank you, that I was doing great, that this was exactly what he needed. 4 hours later, my voice was hoarse and my hands were shaking and I felt empty. But Harper looked at me with this expression that made me feel like maybe I'd done something right. Then he pulled out a folder and showed me the evidence they'd collected over the past few months. Bank statements showing the $11,000 in monthly adoption subsidies, every single payment documented. Printouts of GoFundMe campaigns going back 8 years, adding up to over $400,000 in donations. Spreadsheets tracking where the money actually went compared to what Mom claimed it was for. Harper explained that my mother had been running a sophisticated financial exploitation scheme, using the kids' medical needs and disabilities to generate sympathy and donations while spending most of the money on herself. He showed me receipts for designer clothes and spa treatments and expensive restaurants, all purchased with money that donors thought was going to help sick children. He said the evidence was overwhelming, and that with my statement, they had everything they needed to prove intent. Jenny squeezed my shoulder while I looked at all those numbers and realized just how big this was. My mother hadn't just been neglectful or overwhelmed. She'd been deliberately using us to make money. Then Harper told me something that made my stomach drop. My mother wasn't actually in Ireland for a donor appreciation retreat like she'd told me. She was at a luxury resort posting photos on social media about her much-needed self-care break from the demands of motherhood. He showed me screenshots of her Instagram from the past 5 days. Pictures of her at a spa getting a massage. Pictures of fancy meals and cocktails by a pool. Pictures of her in a hotel robe with captions about how hard it was being a single mother to so many special needs kids and how she deserved this time to recharge. Harper said this evidence of her spending donation money on luxury vacations while leaving me alone with 14 kids, including medically fragile twins, would strengthen the fraud charges significantly. I felt something cold settle in my chest looking at those photos. While I'd been managing dialysis schedules and trying to keep Ava from choking to death, my mother had been at a spa. Jenny drove me back to Alana's house and explained on the way that I'd need to testify in family court about the conditions in the house and Mom's treatment of the children. She said this would help the judge make decisions about permanent placements for my siblings. She also said I didn't have to testify in the criminal trial if I didn't want to, but that my statement to Harper would be used as evidence either way. I asked what would happen to my mother, and Jenny said that depended on a lot of things, but that the charges were serious. Child exploitation, fraud, endangerment, falsifying documents. She could be looking at years in prison. That night back at Alana's, I tried to eat dinner but couldn't finish. My chest felt tight and my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Around 8, I was in my room when it hit me all at once. My mother was going to know I was the one who reported everything. She was going to know I'd called the paramedics and talked to Harper and given them evidence. She was going to hate me. I couldn't breathe. My vision got blurry and my heart was beating, so fast I thought something was wrong with it. Alana must have heard me because she came in and found me sitting on the floor gasping for air. She knelt down in front of me and told me to look at her, to breathe with her, in through my nose and out through my mouth. She kept her voice calm and steady and talked me through it until my breathing slowed down and my vision cleared. Then she reminded me that I was safe now, that my mother couldn't reach me here, that what I'd done was protect children who couldn't protect themselves. She said I'd been put in an impossible situation where I had to choose between my own survival and letting babies suffer, and I'd found a way to save everyone, including myself. She said that took more courage than most adults would have. The next morning, Harper called while I was eating breakfast. He said my mother had been arrested at the airport an hour ago and was being held without bail because she was considered a flight risk. She'd immediately asked for her phone so she could post about this misunderstanding on social media, but police had seized all her devices as evidence. Harper said she'd tried to tell the officers that this was all a mistake, that she was a devoted mother being persecuted for saving orphans, but nobody was buying it. He said she'd be arraigned tomorrow and that I didn't need to be there for that. I hung up and sat there staring at my plate. It was done. My mother was in jail. The kids were safe. And I was here in this quiet house with a locked door and people who actually cared if I was okay. For the first time in 8 years, I didn't have to take care of anyone but myself. That feeling lasted exactly 12 hours. The next morning, Alana was making breakfast when her phone buzzed with a news alert. She looked at it and her face went pale. She turned the phone toward me and I saw the headline on the local news site. Woman arrested for adoption fraud and child exploitation. The article didn't name me or the kids, but it had everything else. The GoFundMe campaigns. The amount of money. Over $400,000 in donations plus $11,000 monthly in subsidies. Comments were already flooding in from people who'd donated. They were furious. Some were demanding refunds. Others were saying they'd suspected something was wrong but didn't know how to report it. One comment said they'd noticed the medical emergencies always happened right when the previous campaign was running out of money. I felt sick reading it, but I also felt this weird sense of relief. People were finally seeing what she really was. Jenny called an hour later. She said the police tip line had been ringing all morning with people who'd followed my mother's social media, donors who'd had bad feelings about the campaigns, followers who'd noticed inconsistencies in her stories. One woman said she'd tried to send gifts directly to the kids, but my mother insisted on cash donations only. Another said she'd asked to visit and my mother had made excuses for months before blocking her. Jenny said these people had wanted to help, but didn't know what they were seeing was actually criminal. They thought maybe they were being too suspicious or judgmental. Now they were coming forward with screenshots and records of their donations, and all of it was helping build the case. 3 days later, Jenny drove me to my first therapy appointment. The counselor's office was in this quiet building with soft lighting and comfortable chairs. The counselor was maybe 40 with kind eyes, and she told me to call her Sarah. She specialized in something called complex trauma and parentification. I didn't know what that meant until she explained it. She said what my mother did was a form of human trafficking, using children for labor and money while denying them basic rights and care. She said I'd been trafficked since I was 9 years old. That word hit me hard. Trafficked. I'd always thought trafficking meant being kidnapped or sold. Sarah said it also meant being exploited for someone else's gain, being forced to work, having your childhood stolen. She said everything my mother did to me and my siblings was trafficking, and it was serious and it was criminal and it wasn't my fault. That same week, Alana sat me down at the kitchen table with a laptop. She'd enrolled me in an online school program so I could finish my junior year credits at my own pace. She showed me how to log in and access my classes. The first assignment was a simple English essay about a book I'd read. I stared at the screen and started crying because I could actually focus on homework. I wasn't listening for babies crying or checking medication schedules or changing diapers. I was just doing homework like a normal 17-year-old. Alana hugged me and said this was what my life should have been all along. Just school and homework and being a kid. She said I'd been robbed of that, but we were getting it back now. Harper called the next day with an update. He said forensic accountants were going through every dollar my mother had received over the past 8 years. Subsidies and donations and everything. They'd found that she spent less than 30% on the children's actual needs. The rest went to personal expenses, luxury items, her own medical procedures, hair appointments and spa days and designer clothes. She'd been living off the money that was supposed to feed and care for 14 kids. Harper said this evidence was crucial because it proved intent. She wasn't just overwhelmed or making mistakes. She was deliberately exploiting children for profit. Then he told me something that made my stomach drop. The premature twins I'd been caring for had a surviving birth mother in the Philippines. She'd been told they died shortly after birth. The adoption agency my mother used had falsified the death certificates and sold the babies. The birth mother had been grieving her twins for months while I was doing their dialysis and keeping them alive. Harper said the adoption agency was now under investigation for trafficking and falsified documents. Multiple families were coming forward with similar stories. Children who were supposedly orphans, but actually had living parents who'd been lied to. Jenny came over that evening to explain what this meant. She said some of my siblings might be able to reunify with birth families who were lied to or forced into giving them up. She said this was good news even though it might mean I wouldn't see them again. I sat there trying to process that. Part of me felt happy for them. They could go home to their real families. But part of me felt like I was losing them all over again. I'd raised these kids. I'd kept them alive. And now they might disappear from my life completely. Jenny said it was okay to feel both things at once. Happy for them and sad for me. She said grief and joy could exist together, and that was normal. 3 weeks after the arrest, I had my first family court hearing. Jenny drove me to the courthouse and walked me through security. My hands were shaking, so bad I could barely hold my phone. We sat in a waiting room until a bailiff called my name. Jenny stood up with me and we walked into the courtroom together. That's when I saw her. My mother was sitting at a table in an orange jumpsuit with handcuffs on her wrists. She looked smaller somehow. Tired. She turned her head when I walked in and tried to make eye contact with me, but Jenny immediately moved to block her view. She positioned herself between us and kept her body there like a wall. The judge asked me to take the witness stand. I walked up and sat down and someone made me swear to tell the truth. The prosecutor started asking me questions about the conditions in the house. How many kids lived there? What my responsibilities were? How much sleep I got? Whether I went to the school? I answered everything as clearly as I could, but my voice kept shaking. Then he asked me to describe the day Marky had the allergic reaction. I took a breath and started talking. I told them about wanting to go to one AP history class. About coming home and finding Marky on the kitchen floor with his lips turning blue. About my mother on the couch updating her campaign post. About her saying accidents happen when you're selfish. About jabbing the EpiPen into his thigh while he was dying and she was typing on her phone. I watched the judge's face while I talked. At first, her expression was neutral and professional. But as I described finding Marky blue on the floor, it shifted. Her eyes went wide. Her mouth got tight. By the time I finished, she looked horrified. She looked at my mother like she was seeing something disgusting. Then she looked at the prosecutor and said she was ordering all children to remain in protective custody. She said she was terminating my mother's parental rights on an emergency basis. My mother started to stand up and say something, but her lawyer pulled her back down. The judge said the evidence of deliberate endangerment and exploitation was overwhelming, and she would not allow these children to remain at risk for one more second. After court, Jenny and I walked out into the hallway. My mother's lawyer was waiting there. He approached me and asked if I would be willing to speak to my mother. Before I could even respond, Jenny stepped between us. She reminded him that contact was prohibited under the protection order. He backed off immediately, but he pulled out a business card and tried to hand it to me. Jenny took it from his hand and threw it in the trash can right there in the hallway. Then she looked at me and said I never had to speak to my mother again if I didn't want to. Not now, not ever. It was completely my choice. She said my mother had stolen enough from me and she wouldn't be allowed to take anything else. That night at Alana's house, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing babies crying in my head even though the house was completely silent. Around 2 a.m., I woke up gasping, because in my dream I was trying to reach the twins, but my arms wouldn't move and their monitors were going off and I couldn't get to them. I sat up in bed with my heart pounding and my hands shaking. Alana must have heard me because she knocked softly on my door and asked if I was okay. I told her about the dream and she came in and sat on the edge of my bed. She reminded me that the babies were safe now with people who knew how to care for them. She said it was normal for my brain to keep trying to protect them, because that's what I'd been trained to do for 8 years. She stayed with me until I fell back asleep. The nightmares kept coming for weeks. Every night I'd wake up panicking that I'd forgotten to do something important, that someone was hurt and needed me. Alana never got mad about it. She'd just sit with me and repeat the same things until my breathing slowed down. The babies were safe. Adults were caring for them now. It wasn't my job anymore. 3 weeks after the court hearing, Harper called me. He said he had good news about some of my siblings. 3 of them, Marky and Lily and their biological brother, had been matched with a foster family who wanted to adopt all 3 of them together. The family had specifically asked for siblings because they understood how important it was to keep them connected. I started crying when he told me. Harper said the family had 2 other adopted kids already, and they had experience with children who'd been through trauma. He said Marky's new parents were trained in managing his allergies, and Lily would be starting therapy twice a week. I asked if I could see them, and Harper said that would be up to Jenny and the new family, but he'd put in a good word for me. A few days later, Jenny called and said she'd arranged for me to video chat with Lily. She set it up on her laptop at her office so she could be there to supervise. When Lily's face appeared on the screen, I almost didn't recognize her. She looked different somehow. Healthier, maybe. Less scared. She told me she had her own bed now with a purple blanket she picked out herself. She said she got to go to a real school where she had friends and ate lunch in a cafeteria. She told me about her new parents and how they read her stories at night and didn't make her say thank you to strangers on camera. She said she missed me, but she was happy. Then she said something that made me cry. She said her therapist told her it was okay to just be a kid and not have to perform or take care of anyone. She said she was learning that she could just play and have fun. I told her I was so proud of her and that I loved her. After the call ended, I sat in Jenny's office and cried for 20 minutes. The next week, Jenny drove me to meet with the prosecutor handling my mother's criminal case. His name was Darren Castillo, and he had this serious face but kind eyes. He sat across from me at a big table in his office and explained all the charges against my mother. Multiple counts of fraud, child exploitation, child endangerment, falsifying documents. He had papers spread out everywhere with highlighted sections and sticky notes. He said if my mother was convicted on all counts, she was looking at 15 to 25 years in prison. Maybe more depending on what the judge decided. He explained each charge carefully and asked if I had questions. I asked him what would happen if she was found not guilty. He said that was extremely unlikely given the amount of evidence they had, but if it happened, the children would still be in protective custody, and she'd never be allowed to foster or adopt again. Castillo told me that my mother's defense lawyers were trying to paint her as an overwhelmed single mother who made mistakes. They were going to argue that she loved the children and was doing her best with limited resources. But he said the evidence of deliberate exploitation and financial fraud was too strong for that defense to work. He pulled out a copy of my statement to Harper and pointed to the part where I described finding Marky Blue on the floor, while my mother posted on social media. He said that testimony about her letting Marky nearly die as punishment was particularly damning because it showed intent. It proved she knew what she was doing. He said the financial records showing she spent 70% of the money on herself instead of the kids made it impossible to claim she was just overwhelmed. This was calculated exploitation, and the jury would see that. Then Castillo told me something that made my stomach drop. The adoption agency that placed the twins and several other siblings with my mother had been shut down by the state. They were under investigation for trafficking and fraud. Multiple families were coming forward with stories about being pressured to adopt children with serious medical needs they weren't prepared to handle. Some families said the agency lied about the children's conditions or didn't provide promised support services. He said the agency had been operating for 12 years, and they were still investigating how many children were affected. Some of the kids might not have been legally available for adoption at all. He said the twins' case was especially bad because their birth mother had been told they died, and she never consented to the adoption. I felt sick thinking about how deep this went. Back at Alana's house, she helped me fill out paperwork for something called victims' compensation. She explained that as a victim of exploitation, I was entitled to support services to cover my medical expenses and therapy costs. The forms asked detailed questions about what happened to me and what kind of help I needed. Alana sat with me while I wrote it all out. She kept reminding me that accepting help didn't make me weak or ungrateful. She said I deserved support after what I'd been through. She said the state had a responsibility to help me heal. The application asked for medical records, so we included documentation of my arthritis, and the growth issues and the stress-related problems. Alana said the compensation could cover my therapy sessions and my medications, and maybe even help with college later if I wanted to go. 4 months after my mother's arrest, I had to go to another hearing. This one was different. The judge was reviewing permanent placement plans for all my siblings. Jenny drove me to the courthouse and we sat in the gallery while the judge went through each child's case one by one. Some of them were being adopted by their foster families who'd fallen in love with them during the temporary placement. Some were being reunified with birth relatives who'd been found and vetted by social services. The older ones were going into long-term therapeutic foster care because they needed more intensive support. I watched the judge approve each plan and it felt surreal. These were my siblings and now they were going to live with other families in other houses. I'd never see some of them again. Jenny squeezed my hand when she saw me crying. A week after that hearing, Jenny called with incredible news. The twins' birth mother was flying to the United States with help from an advocacy organization that worked with families affected by adoption fraud. Jenny arranged for me to meet her through a video call. When the call connected, I saw this young woman maybe in her mid-20s with the same eyes as the twins. She was crying before anyone even said anything. Through a translator, she told me that she'd been told her babies died minutes after birth because they were too premature. The hospital told her they'd disposed of the bodies. She never knew they survived. She never knew they'd been taken to another country. She thanked me over and over for taking care of them when she couldn't. She said I saved their lives by calling 911 that day. She said she was working with lawyers to get them back now that she knew they were alive. I told her I was sorry for everything that happened. I told her the twins were beautiful and strong. After the call, I realized I'd helped save them in more ways than one. I'd kept them alive, and now they were going home. Jenny came over to Alana's house a few days later to talk to me about visiting my siblings. She said I could have supervised visits with the ones who wanted to see me, but I needed to understand our relationship would be different now. She sat across from me at the kitchen table and explained it carefully. Before, I was their sister parent. I fed them and changed them and took care of them when they were sick. But now I could just be their sister. I could play with them and talk to them and love them, but adults would handle the parenting part. She said this was healthier for everyone, especially for me. She said I needed to learn how to have normal sibling relationships where I wasn't responsible for their survival. It sounded good, but it also scared me because I didn't know how to be around them without taking care of them. That's all I'd ever done. Jenny scheduled my first visit with Marky, Lily, and their sibling for the following Thursday at a family center downtown. I sat in the waiting room picking at my fingernails until a staff member called my name and led me to a bright playroom with toys scattered across the floor. Marky ran to me first and wrapped his arms around my legs, but then pulled back like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to hug me. Lily hung back by the door holding their foster mother's hand, and I realized I didn't know what to do with my own hands. The foster mother introduced herself as Rebecca and sat down on the floor near the toy kitchen. She started pretending to cook something and asked Lily to help her make pretend pancakes. Marky grabbed a truck and pushed it across the carpet, making engine noises. I stood there frozen because every instinct in my body was screaming to check if Marky had eaten lunch, or if Lily needed the bathroom, or if anyone had a fever. Rebecca looked up at me and patted the floor next to her. She handed me a plastic spatula and said we were making a feast. I sat down slowly and flipped a pretend pancake in the toy pan. Lily giggled and added pretend syrup. Marky crashed his truck into the toy refrigerator and we all laughed. For 20 minutes, I just played with them without checking anyone's temperature or counting out medications or cutting food into tiny pieces. When the visit ended, Marky hugged me again and Lily whispered that she loved me. Rebecca walked me to the door and told me I did great and that it would get easier each time. 2 days later, Harper called while I was helping Alana fold laundry. He told me my mother's trial date was set for 6 months from now and asked if I would be willing to testify in person in front of the jury. My hands started shaking and I dropped the towel I was holding. Harper said I didn't have to decide right away, but that my testimony would be powerful because I could tell the jury directly what she did to us. I picked up the towel and folded it into a perfect square the way I'd learned to fold the baby's blankets. I told Harper yes because I wanted those 12 people to hear my voice and see my face when I explained how she let Marky turn blue on the kitchen floor. Harper said he'd work with me to prepare and that I was brave. After I hung up, I went to my room and lay on my bed staring at the ceiling. Alana found me there an hour later and sat on the edge of the bed. She said she'd noticed I was struggling with guilt about the kids being in different homes and asked if I wanted to talk about it. I told her I felt like I'd failed them by letting them get separated. Alana pulled out her phone and showed me information about a support group for teens who'd been parentified. She said hearing other people's stories might help me understand that I was a child too, and that none of this was ever my responsibility. The next Tuesday, she drove me to a community center where 6 other teenagers sat in a circle with a counselor. One girl talked about raising her 3 younger siblings while her mom worked 3 jobs. A boy described taking care of his dad who had MS since he was 10. Another girl cried while explaining how she'd been her baby brother's primary caregiver since she was 12, and he was born premature. I listened to their stories and realized they all sounded like mine in different ways. The counselor said we'd all been robbed of our childhoods by adults who should have protected us instead of using us. When it was my turn to share, I told them about the 14 kids and the GoFundMe campaigns, and how I thought I was the only one keeping everyone alive. The boy who took care of his dad nodded and said he'd felt the same way. After the meeting, 3 of them gave me their phone numbers and said I could text them anytime. On the drive home, Alana asked how I felt, and I said later somehow. The following week, Jenny took me to my first physical therapy appointment for my arthritis. The therapist examined my swollen knuckles and wrists and designed exercises to help reduce the inflammation and build strength. She said my joints had been under extreme stress for years, and that with consistent therapy, I could manage the pain and improve my mobility. After physical therapy, Jenny drove me to meet with a nutritionist who reviewed my medical records and asked about my eating habits. I explained that I usually ate whatever the kids didn't finish, and that I couldn't remember the last time I'd had 3 full meals in one day. The nutritionist created a meal plan focused on foods that would help my body catch up on years of malnutrition. She said with proper nutrition, and the fact that I was still 17, I might be able to gain a few inches in height as my body finally got what it needed to grow. She scheduled follow-up appointments every 2 weeks to track my progress. I started doing my physical therapy exercises every morning, and Alana made sure I ate everything the nutritionist recommended. 5 months crawled by with weekly therapy sessions and bi-weekly visits with Marky and Lily, and monthly court updates from Jenny. Then one afternoon in early March, Castillo called and asked if I could come to his office the next day. Jenny drove me there, and we sat across from him at his big desk covered in file folders. Castillo explained that my mother's defense team was offering a plea deal where she would plead guilty to reduced charges in exchange for 12 years in state prison. He said it was completely my choice whether to accept the deal or push for trial, and that he would support whatever I decided. He explained that a trial could result in a longer sentence, but it would also mean I'd have to testify and be cross-examined by her lawyers. I asked how long we had to decide, and he said 1 week. That night I couldn't sleep, so I made a list of pros and cons on a piece of notebook paper. The next morning I talked it through with Jenny at the kitchen table. She said both options were valid and that I needed to think about what would help me heal. I met with my therapist that afternoon and she asked me what felt right in my gut. I talked to Alana while we made dinner, and she reminded me that 12 years meant the youngest kids would be adults before my mother got out. I thought about the twins who were back with their real mother in the Philippines, and about Lily learning to just be a kid, and about Marky playing with trucks instead of worrying about EpiPens. 3 days later, I called Castillo and told him I wanted to accept the plea deal because 12 years of certainty felt better than the risk of her getting less time at trial. He said he'd file the paperwork, and that the plea hearing would be scheduled within 2 weeks. The hearing happened on a cold morning in late March. Jenny and Alana sat behind me in the courtroom while I watched my mother stand next to her lawyer in an orange jumpsuit. The judge asked if she understood she was giving up her right to trial, and she said yes in this small voice I barely recognized. Then the judge made her allocate to each charge, which meant she had to say out loud exactly what she did. She admitted to exploiting children for financial gain. She admitted to falsifying medical emergencies to increase donations. She admitted to endangering children's lives through neglect. With each admission, I felt something shift inside my chest, like a weight I'd been carrying was finally being lifted. The judge asked if everything she said was true, and she whispered yes. I watched her face and saw no remorse, just resignation that she'd been caught. The validation that I wasn't crazy or dramatic washed over me, and I had to grip the edge of the bench to keep from crying. 2 weeks later, we returned for sentencing. The judge reviewed the case file and the victim impact statements and the forensic accounting reports. Then she sentenced my mother to 12 years in state prison plus 10 years probation. During probation, she would be prohibited from fostering or adopting children or running any fundraising campaigns. She was also ordered to pay restitution to the donors who'd been defrauded, and to the state for the fraudulent adoption subsidies. My mother's face stayed blank, like she was somewhere else entirely. After the judge dismissed us, Castillo met me in the hallway and explained that with good behavior, my mother would likely serve about 10 years. He said when she was released, she would be monitored closely by probation officers. Then he asked if I wanted to request a no-contact order that would extend beyond her sentence, and I said yes immediately without even thinking about it. Jenny hugged me in the courthouse parking lot and said the hardest part was over. On the drive back to Alana's house, she explained that now that the criminal case was resolved, we could focus on my permanency plan. She asked if I wanted to stay with Alana long-term, or if I wanted to explore other options like kinship placement or independent living programs for older teens. I looked out the window at the trees starting to bud with early spring leaves and realized I'd stopped thinking of Alana's house as temporary placement. Somewhere over the past 5 months, it had become home. Alana sat with me that evening and asked if I wanted to talk about what staying here long-term would look like. I nodded because the idea of leaving felt wrong now, like I'd be losing something important. She told me she'd be happy to be my foster mother through high school and support me through college if that's what I wanted. She said she'd watched me change from this scared, worn-out kid into someone strong, and she wanted to keep being part of that. I cried a little because nobody had ever said they wanted to keep me before. 2 weeks later, Jenny brought over a stack of paperwork to make the placement official. I signed forms changing my status from emergency foster care to long-term, and it felt huge, like I was actually building something that might last. Alana suggested we celebrate by fixing up my room to make it really mine, not just a temporary space. We went to Target that weekend, and I picked out posters of bands I actually liked, not the kid-friendly stuff my mother always made me display for her videos. I chose dark blue curtains instead of the plain white ones, and Alana bought me a desk lamp shaped like a rocket, because I mentioned once that I used to want to be an astronaut before I spent all my time changing diapers. Hanging those posters felt like claiming space for myself, deciding who I was instead of who I had to be. 6 months after the arrest, Jenny helped me enroll in regular high school part-time. I started with just 3 classes because jumping back into full-time felt like too much. My teachers knew my situation because the school counselor briefed them, and they were good about giving me extensions when I needed them. The first day back, I sat in junior year English and realized I was just sitting there learning, not worrying about who needed to be fed or whose diaper needed changing or which medical alarm was about to go off. My history teacher celebrated when I turned in my first essay on time, making a big deal about how well written it was, and I felt proud in a way I hadn't felt in years. Math was harder because I'd missed so much, but my teacher stayed after school twice a week to help me catch up. I joined the debate team because I liked arguing about ideas instead of begging for help, and the other kids treated me normal, like I was just another student instead of the girl from the news stories. Jenny arranged for me to have dinner at Lily and Marky's adoptive family's house one Friday evening. Their new parents, who I only knew as Mr. and Mrs. Trotter, picked me up from Alana's and drove me to their place across town. Walking into their house felt strange because it was so normal. Toys were scattered around, but not in the chaotic way they'd been at my mother's house. These toys were being played with, not used as props for photos. Lily ran up and hugged me, talking fast about her new school and her friend Judy, and how she got to take dance classes now. Marky showed me his room, which had dinosaur sheets and glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling, and he seemed bigger somehow, less scared. During dinner, Mr. Trotter asked me about school, and Mrs. Trotter made sure I had enough food, and I watched them parent my siblings the way parents actually should. Lily asked if I could come back next month, and Mrs. Trotter said of course that I was always welcome. Driving home, I felt this weird mix of sad and happy. Sad because I wasn't raising them anymore. Happy because they were thriving in ways they never could have with my mother. The next week, Jenny brought me a letter from the twins' birth mother in the Philippines. She wrote through a translator, telling me her name was Maria, and thanking me for taking care of her babies when she thought they were dead. She included photos of the twins, who were almost 2 now, smiling real smiles in a bright room with their grandmother. Maria wrote that they were healthy and growing, that the kidney issues were being managed by doctors in Manila, and that she cried every day grateful to have them back. She said she wanted me to know they were loved, that they had cousins and aunts and uncles who spoiled them, that they would grow up knowing their real family. I kept those photos in my desk drawer and looked at them when I needed to remember that some good came from all of it. Jenny told me Maria sent updates every few months, and I started writing back through the translator. Short letters about how I was doing in the school and how I was glad the twins were home. I started volunteering at a local organization that helped foster kids navigate the system. Jenny connected me with them after I mentioned wanting to do something useful with my experience. Every Saturday, I spent 3 hours at their office, answering phones and helping younger kids fill out school forms and just listening when they needed to talk. A lot of them had stories like mine, different details but the same core of being used by adults who were supposed to protect them. Sharing what happened to me helped them feel less alone, and working toward changing the system gave me something to focus on, besides just surviving. The organization's director asked me to speak at a fundraiser about adoption reform, and I said yes, even though the idea scared me. Standing in front of 50 people and telling them about my mother's exploitation and the need for better oversight felt powerful, like I was turning something awful into something that might help other kids. Alana helped me apply to colleges that had support programs for foster youth. She researched which schools offered full scholarships and housing assistance and connection to counselors who understood our situations. We spent weeks on my essay, with Alana reading drafts and helping me figure out how to write about resilience and advocacy without making it sound like a sad story begging for pity. When the acceptance letters started arriving in March, I couldn't believe it. 5 schools accepted me with full scholarships covering tuition, room, board, and books. My school counselor pulled me aside after I told her and said my essay about using my experience to advocate for other kids were incredibly powerful, that admissions committees could tell I was someone who would make a difference. I picked a state school 3 hours away that had a strong social work program, close enough to visit Alana and my siblings, but far enough to feel like a fresh start. On what would have been my mother's birthday in April, I had a complete breakdown. Alana found me crying in my room, holding a photo from when I was 9, right after my mother brought home the first baby. In the photo, she's hugging me and smiling, and I'm smiling too because I didn't know yet what she was doing. I told Alana I hated myself for still loving the mother I thought I had, for missing her even though I knew what she did. Alana called my therapist, who talked me through it over the phone. She explained that grieving the mother I needed was different from excusing the mother I got, that I could mourn the parent I should have had while still being angry at the parent I actually had. She said it was normal to have complicated feelings, that trauma doesn't erase love even when it should. The grief episode lasted 2 days, but coming out of it I felt lighter somehow, like I'd given myself permission to feel everything instead of just the anger. In May, I attended the hearing where Marky, Lily, and their siblings' adoption was finalized. Jenny drove me to the courthouse and we sat in the gallery while the judge made it official. The Trotter family stood at the front with all 3 kids, and the judge asked the kids if they wanted to be adopted. Lily said yes in this clear, happy voice, and Marky nodded so hard his whole body moved. When the judge declared the adoption final, I started crying happy tears because they had a forever family now, one that would actually take care of them. After the hearing, the Trotters invited me to their celebration lunch, and Mrs. the Trotter told me I was always going to be the kids' sister, that they wanted me to stay connected and be part of their lives. Lily hugged me and whispered that she loved me, and I told her I loved her too, that I was so happy for her. The following week, Jenny came to Alana's house with her laptop and showed me photos that made me cry all over again. 4 of my former siblings had been reunified with their birth families after the investigation proved the adoption agency had lied to their parents. Jenny showed me pictures of them with their biological mothers and fathers, with grandparents and cousins, back in their home countries or states. One little girl I'd cared for was in Guatemala with her mother who'd been told she died during childbirth. 2 brothers were in Texas with their father who'd been told they were being placed in temporary foster care but would be returned. Another boy was in Vietnam with his entire extended family surrounding him. Jenny said the agency had targeted poor families and lied to them, and now those lies were being undone. I felt genuine joy seeing those kids back where they belonged, even though it meant I'd probably never see them again. They got to go home, and that mattered more than anything. In September, my school counselor asked if I'd be willing to give a presentation about adoption fraud and parentification for a special assembly. I stood in front of 300 students and talked about the warning signs, about how exploitation can hide behind the appearance of charity, about how children shouldn't be responsible for raising other children. My hands shook the whole time, but I got through it. Afterward, 7 students came up to me privately and shared their own stories of family exploitation. One girl was caring for her grandmother and 3 younger siblings while her mom worked 2 jobs and never came home. Another was used as free labor in her uncle's restaurant every day after school until midnight. A boy told me his parents made him lie to social workers about his disabled brother's care. The counselor pulled me aside later and asked if I'd help develop a peer support program for students dealing with parentification. I said yes because I wanted other kids to know they weren't alone the way I'd felt alone for so many years. Alana and I started building our own traditions that fall. Every Friday became movie night where we'd make popcorn and watch whatever I wanted without me having to manage anyone else's needs or preferences. She taught me how to actually cook instead of just surviving, showing me how to make pasta from scratch and explaining why certain ingredients work together. We took weekend trips to places I'd never been, small towns an hour away or hiking trails in state parks, and I learned what it felt like to just exist without constantly scanning for the next crisis. She bought me clothes that fit properly and let me pick them out myself instead of wearing whatever donation bags provided. She made sure I ate 3 meals a day and went to bed at reasonable times and did normal teenage things like complaining about homework. I was learning what it felt like to be cared for instead of being the caregiver, and some days it felt so foreign I wanted to run back to what I knew, even though what I knew had nearly killed me. A year after my mother's arrest, I testified before a state legislative committee about adoption fraud and the need for better oversight. I sat at a table with a microphone in front of me and told them exactly how my mother had exploited the system, how she'd collected hundreds of thousands of dollars, while children suffered, how the lack of home visits and financial audits had allowed her to operate for years. I brought documentation that Harper had helped me compile showing the gaps in the system. The legislators asked questions, and I answered them honestly, describing how easy it had been for my mother to manipulate the process. 3 months later, Jenny called to tell me that my testimony had helped pass new legislation requiring monthly home visits for families with more than 3 adopted children and annual financial audits of all adoption subsidy spending. The law was named after the twins who'd been trafficked from the Philippines. I cried when she told me because it meant other kids might be protected in ways I hadn't been. That winter, a letter arrived from the court explaining that several GoFundMe donors had contributed to a trust fund for me and my siblings' education and therapy costs. The fund had over $100,000 in it and was managed by a neutral trustee who would distribute money based on actual needs and submitted receipts. Jenny explained that some donors had been horrified to learn how my mother had used their money and wanted to make sure we actually benefited from their intended generosity. The letter included a list of approved expenses like college tuition, therapy sessions, medical care, and educational supplies. I could access funds for college application fees and SAT prep courses. It felt strange knowing that something good had come from all those fraudulent campaigns, like maybe the donors' intentions were being honored even though my mother had betrayed them. Harper contacted me in early spring to say that the adoption agency investigation had led to criminal charges against 5 people involved in falsifying documents and coercing birth families. He explained that my case had been the catalyst that exposed a much larger trafficking operation, spanning 4 states and 2 countries. The agency had been lying to poor families about their options, telling mothers their babies had died when they were actually being adopted out, pressuring fathers to sign away rights with false promises of temporary placement. Harper said investigators had identified over 30 children who'd been trafficked through this network and were working to reunify as many as possible with their biological families. He thanked me for my courage in coming forward, because without my case, they never would have known to look deeper into the agency's practices. I started my senior year of high school in September, living a relatively normal teenage life. I had actual friends who invited me to hang out on weekends and didn't know me as the girl who raised 14 kids. I joined the debate team and discovered I was good at building arguments and thinking on my feet, probably from years of trying to anticipate my mother's manipulation tactics. Alana was teaching me to drive, and I'd already failed the test once but planned to try again. I was making college plans, researching social work programs and child advocacy degrees, filling out applications with Alana's help. The difference between who I was a year ago and who I was becoming felt massive. I could sleep through the night without listening for medical alarms. I could eat a meal without counting how much food was left for everyone else. I could make plans for my own future instead of just surviving each day. On the anniversary of the 9/11 call that changed everything, Jenny drove me to meet Lily and Marky at a park near their adoptive home. We played on the swings together, and they told me about their school and their friends and their new puppy named Buttons. Lily showed me a picture she'd drawn in art class of her family, and she'd included me in it as her big sister standing separate from her parents. Marky demonstrated how high he could pump on the swing and asked if I was proud of him. I told him I was so proud of both of them and that I loved seeing them so happy. Their adoptive mother watched from a bench nearby, giving us space but staying close enough to supervise. When it was time to leave, Lily hugged me tight and whispered that she still remembered when I took care of her, but that she was glad we both got to just be kids now, even though I was almost grown up. Watching them climb into their family's car and wave goodbye through the window, I realized they were healing, and so was I. All of us in our own ways and at our own pace. I turned 18 in November and started preparing to graduate high school in the spring. I'd been accepted to college with a full scholarship to study social work and child advocacy. I kept in touch with 6 of my former siblings who wanted relationships with me, visiting some and video chatting with others. I had a support system of adults who actually cared about my well-being, including Alana, Jenny, Harper, and my therapist. I was building a life focused on helping other kids escape the exploitation I'd survived. My mother was in prison serving her 12-year sentence. The children were safe and thriving in appropriate homes with families who actually wanted to parent them. I was finally free to just be myself, a young woman with a future full of possibilities instead of a child trapped in an impossible situation. I'd spent years being told I was selfish for wanting my own life, and now I was learning that taking care of myself wasn't selfish at all. It was survival, and maybe even the beginning of actually living.